morning. It is Wednesday, January 20th, 2016. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. Coming up later today, a new UN report claims ISIS is holding thousands of women and children as slaves in Iraq. 2015 marks China's slowest growth in 25 years. We're going to take a closer look at what this means for the Asian and global economy. And later on the show, my name is Rachel Curry. Alan Rickman's monodrama on the American activist who was killed in Gaza a decade ago still shocks Israeli crowds. Good morning, I'm Yael Lavie, and we begin this morning with the power dominating the Middle East chessboard, namely ISIS. In the militant group that confirmed yesterday that Jihadi John, who was the face of the group's terror acts online and on the ground, has indeed been killed in an American drone airstrike in November. The group glorified his life in an online article, but also acknowledged that he indeed has passed away. All that news came on the heels of an alarming UN report regarding ISIS mainly, and focusing on Iraq and ISIS that came out yesterday. According to that report, a staggering almost 20,000 civilians lost their lives in the war-torn country in the past 2 years. The number, according to the United Nations, does not include those who died as a result of lack of food, water, or medical care. So basically, it simply scratches the surface of how many perished in Iraq over the course of the last 2 years. The report also gave specific attention to the atrocities committed by IS jihadists, describing killings, some of them public, by shooting, beheading, bulldozing, burning alive, and throwing people off the top of buildings. It also decried reports of the Islamic State murdering child soldiers who tried to flee and subjecting women and children to sexual violence and sexual slavery. An estimated 3,500, that's right, 3,500 people, mainly women and children, are supposedly currently being held hostage and as slaves by ISIS in Iraq. Now, the campaign against ISIS in Iraq is currently focused on the city of Ramadi, which has turned into a ghost town after months of siege and aerial bombardments and weeks of house-to-house combat carried out by U.S.-trained units of the Iraqi military. Will this military campaign to take back the country produce any results? That's the guess of all of us. And will next year's UN report show a decline in these horrific deaths that seem to be part and parcel of our lives in the Middle East? We're going to take a closer look at this in this next half hour. And with me in studio, our I-24 News senior Middle East analyst, Ali Waked. Good morning to you. As well as Haaretz senior defense correspondent and analyst, Amir Owen. And I cannot do this without Ruthie Sinai, I-24 News senior news editor. Good morning to you. Let's take a look at the following report from Iraq. Break it down after that.
A new report released by the UN Tuesday paints a grim, if somewhat incomplete, picture of the ongoing strife in Iraq, a country being torn apart by sectarian violence. The report states that more than 18,800 civilians were killed and over 36,000 wounded in the 22-month period between January 2014 and October 2015. More than 3.2 million have been displaced. The figures are based on testimonies taken from victims, survivors, and witnesses, and documents atrocities committed by the various elements engaged in violence in Iraq. The report focuses heavily on the Islamic State terror group and the radical methods it has employed, including public executions, the abduction and indoctrination of children, as well as sexual enslavement.
We turned off the lights and the heat, and we kept the children silent in order not to be noticed by them. They forced many families to live with them to Juweiba. They loaded people in pickup trucks without clothes and without anything.
The UN says 3,500 people, mainly women and children, are currently being held as IS slaves.
I told them that we wanted to stay here, even if we die here. They started to fire into the air, and they told us if we stayed, they would shoot us both dead. And then they brought vehicles and forced us in.
The UN admits the real numbers behind the violence may be significantly higher, as many areas of Iraq are too dangerous for UN and NGO personnel to enter. The report also notes atrocities committed by Iraqi security services and various allied militia, as well as Kurdish forces.
When we entered the areas of Abu Ghnaim and Sofia, we faced resistance by the IS group. They fought us, but God helped us in our confrontation with them. We killed them, and the rest were injured and ran away towards Sajaria.
At least 43 people have been killed over the past week in attacks linked to Shiite militia forces in the town of Muqtadiya in Diyala province. These are thought to have been retribution for IS killings. Such attacks have become all too common in recent years. The sectarian cycle of violence is the major challenge facing the government in Baghdad as it attempts to hold the Iraqi state together.
To go straight to Iraq first, we're joined from Erbil by freelance journalist Mohammed Salih. Mohammed, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. We were discussing actually in studio as that report played out that Iraq has been basically dominating our journalistic lives for over a decade, if not 2 decades. When we're looking at the battle against ISIS, but especially that UN report that came out yesterday, the situation that grave, when it comes to the people on the ground, do they wish for a different strategy or hope for a different strategy to try and change the situation on the ground?
Unfortunately, violations are not really something new in the history of Iraq, and people have had very bad experiences in terms of how they have been treated by the armed forces of the state or different armed groups in the country. People do definitely hope that the situation would have been different, but in light of the reality on the ground, and the presence of all these different armed groups, whether ISIS or different military groups and the security services of the state, this kind of outcome is not really something surprising, and especially given that in a country like Iraq, there has never been any sort of accountability for the armed forces, be those, as I said, the state's armed forces or military groups.
No, and specifically that, as you said, because the UN report is hoping for some form of accountability. But before we continue, I want with you, Mohammed Salih, when it comes to Ramadi, because over the course of the last several months, we keep hearing Western reports that the battle against ISIS is going well, et cetera, Ramadi supposedly taken. But is Ramadi really in the hands of Iraqi forces and out of the hands of ISIS?
The reports on the ground indicate that the city has not been fully controlled by the Iraqi forces. What they have been able to take so far is the government district in the center of the city and some neighborhoods of Ramadi. But ISIS seems to have put up a very strong resistance in Ramadi, and the Iraqi security forces and their local Sunni allies definitely have a very tough fight to carry out, and the city is far from being taken as of now by the Iraqi forces.
Yeah, and I think that's information that's important for everybody to hear. I want to thank you, Mohammed, for joining us from Erbil. Ali Waqid, I want to start with you, Ramadi. We're looking at this, the reports coming out, 20,000 people dying just from, war-inflicted situations in the UN report. Ramadi still not completely out of the hands of ISIS. Where is this heading, if at all?
I think the problem is that what we saw in Mosul, and everybody was shocked of the lack of competence of the Iraqi army. It's still there.
It shocks me that people are still shocked by the lack of competence of the Iraqi army.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are two scenarios: whether the Iraqi army will try to replan their operation in Ramadi, or they will be using the armed group, the Shiite militias that cause atrocities elsewhere. And in this case, the policy of Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi will be going down, because he hoped to see a collaboration, and it is happening between the Sunni tribes and the Iraqi official forces. And in order to liberate the city, if he will be obliged to use the Shiite militias, this will cause huge damage to his effort to see some kind of collaboration between the Sunnite community and between the Iraqi forces. And in the middle, there are the Americans that still hope to see Iraqi forces and Sunni tribes collaborating, still hope to distance the Shiite militias, supported by Iran and trained by Iran, operating in Ramadi and in the region, because this means new atrocities, and this means that a hope for a certain coexistence between the Sunnite community and the Shiite majority will be collapsing once again on the rock of Ramadi.
On the rock of Ramadi. Amir Oren with us in studio as well, but at the end of the day, the Americans, and I don't want to say, but they don't really care about the details and the specifics of that UN report and how many people are dying. At the end of the day, when it comes to international campaigns over Iraq, they have a different agenda. So in your mind, that agenda on the ground in Iraq right now, vis-a-vis agreements that were signed regionally as of late, where is that heading for the Iraqi regime there, if there even is one?
Okay, several points there. First of all, there is no need to denigrate the competence of the Iraqi professional military. The problem is it has been transformed into ISIS. The
military, the Iraqi military.
Former military officers who served under Saddam Hussein are now leading ISIS, not fighting against ISIS, but are fighting for ISIS.
And the Iraqi army, though, right now, the Iraqi army as it exists is not really a military.
Right.
What is it?
So the problem is the personal and organizational motivation as well as the political setup. Now, in the last 60 to 70 years, Iraq has gone down from a monarchy through dictatorship to anarchy. It used to operate under a king with a strong prime minister, Nouri Said, but propped up by the British. And then there was a series of coups by the military and the Ba'ath, culminating in the dictatorial regime of Saddam Hussein. This has all evaporated. There is no country to speak of. It's not governable. Now, what the Americans are doing, and this is why Defense Secretary Ash Carter has gone to Paris for a meeting of the coalition, but minus the Arab members, is to try and fashion a strategy whereby they will train not from scratch. The old and failed method was to recruit people and tell them, okay, guys, now you're going to boot camp. Later, you're going to advanced training. You are now a battalion. This has failed. What they are now trying to do is to retrain local militias or Sunni tribes who are going to defend their homes first, and then perhaps advance on other targets. Now, Ramadi, to their mind, is to a large extent a victory. Even though
it's not entirely complete.
Yes, but you never really clear a town. There are always pockets of resistance, and we heard that ISIS is executing its own fighters if they don't fight with enough motivation. Now, as Carter said it, after Ramadi, there is another place called Hit, and after that comes Mosul, the liberation of Mosul. And they are trying to do it step by step in order, as he calls it, to attack the parent tumor. This is, of course, a cancer metaphor. The parent tumor is in Iraq and the Levant. Then there are the other places around it, and then protecting the homeland, the United States. You asked about the American agenda. The American agenda is first and foremost to protect the United States.
Yeah, but it's just, when I think of some accountability, because at the end of the day, and with that I think, at the end of the day, if we're looking at Iraq from 2003, the question that we're asking in the media, maybe Ruthie's asking it with me, wasn't it better under Saddam Hussein days?
Well, yeah, that's one question. But the other question is, to borrow your metaphor about a cancer, chemotherapy in the end ends up killing more cancer patients than cancer. So, all these operations to clean out Ramadi and clean out other parts. And
the question is, where do other tumors come up?
But what Defense Secretary Carter emphasized is that in addition to these military forces, police forces, and other forces serving the population for the follow-up phase are necessary, because if it is only go in, occupy, get out, it will be to no avail, because soon enough the enemy will be back.
In the mid-2000s, the first success of the Americans in the Sunnite areas in Iraq was when they convinced the heads of tribes to contribute to the fight against the spiritual leader of the Islamic State, Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi. Until then,
the Anbar awakening.
Absolutely, and until then, they were facing huge problems problems to convince the Sunni tribes that they can be part of the decision-making in Iraq. Before the sectarian division went so deep, it succeeded. Now the question is, in order to fight the Islamic State, you need the Sunni to be convinced that they are supporting the Islamic State by default. The Islamic State, with all its atrocities, seem for the Sunni community as their only choice in this anarchy in Iraq, led and controlled by Iran and Iran-supported forces. I think if there is a real will to fight the Islamic State, you should keep supporting the Sunni tribes, even if the price is some problems in cleaning Iraq from the Islamic State at the rhythm that the Iraqi government wanted to see.
But the colonel, the brigade commander in charge of this Anbar awakening, McFarland, is now the commanding general of the troops in Iraq.
Well, they're all going back there, but as we're discussing, as I'm sure the world leaders are discussing strategies of how to combat ISIS on the ground, that UN report that came out, and the one thing that is most important to remember is the people on the ground who are suffering from it. And it's not just Iraq, because the international war on ISIS is equally intense in neighboring Syria, which is rapidly becoming another Iraq, if not already there, which today involves the joint military might of some of the region and world's biggest powers. And the fighting in Syria creates a new humanitarian crisis on a daily basis for at least 4.5 years. That crisis is created now, as of late, is mounting along the Syrian-Jordanian border, right next door from where we're sitting here, mainly. Fearing the infiltration of ISIS fighters among the thrones of displaced people fleeing intensified fighting, Jordan has all but stopped the processing and admittance of asylum seekers in the country. And as a result, nearly 20,000 people are now stuck in desert no man's land, separating the countries with only bare necessities for survival. The kingdom, the Hashemite kingdom, which claims it is already hosting 1.4 million Syrian refugees, let alone so many Iraqi refugees apropos that other war, is saying that it cannot take control of all of them and it cannot help. And thus, another door closes on Syrian refugees in the hell that has become their land because of ISIS. Take a look at the following report from the Jordanian border. Break it down from there.
On a visit to a Jordanian refugee camp, Filippo Grandi, the new UN High Commissioner for Refugees, stressed that, quote, peace is the objective that we should have first and foremost in our minds.
It is essential that the international community, all actors that have an influence on the parties to the conflict, and the parties to the conflict themselves, first and foremost, exercise greater efforts towards peace.
Syrians fleeing the nearly 5-year civil war currently wait in no man's land at the only 2 remote Jordan border crossings that are devoid of shade or water, hoping their turn to cross will come. Jordan has insisted it must screen newcomers intensely to ensure they are actual refugees and not extremists attempting to infiltrate the country. During the first 2 years of the Syrian conflict, there were 45 border crossings along the 378-kilometer frontier. The number of Syrians stuck along the border was a few hundred 3 months ago. But today the number has mushroomed dramatically, with around 1,300 Syrians stuck in Hadalat and a whopping 15,000 trapped in Rokbain.
First, we have to do a thorough security and background checks on these refugees. Security is more important than the humanitarian aspect, even though we must not forget the later.
The kingdom says it is hosting 1.4 million Syrian refugees, equal to 20% of Jordan's population, and more than twice as many as the 600,000 figure given by the UN refugee agency, UNHCR.
Joining us over the phone from Amman, via Skype from Amman right now, is Middle East researcher at the Human Rights Watch, Adam Kugel. Adam, good morning to you. What is the situation on the border right now?
Well, right now, the situation is that we, I think, have around 16,000, if not more, Syrians who are trapped in these informal encampments just inside Jordan's border along a burn that demarks a demilitarized zone between Jordan and Syria. These are very, very remote locations. As I understand it, services at both of the crossings have improved somewhat, but it's still very, very difficult to get for UN agencies and other INGOs working at the berm sites to get basic essential goods out there, such as water and food, to the Syrians that are stranded there. One of the sites, Rukban, which is right near the Iraqi Jordan-Syrian border, where all the borders come together, is actually completely off-road to get there. And when it rains, like it's been raining, in fact, for the last several days here, it's very, very difficult for any sort of trucks or other vehicles to actually access the site. It becomes very difficult, which really puts the Syrians who are stranded there at risk.
At risk, and sadly, it's a scene that we're seeing around so many borders in the Middle East and, of course, in Europe as well. Adam, quick question to you as we finalize it. What are the Jordanians saying? How long are these refugees going to be kept there? What do we think their near future is?
Well, it's interesting because Jordan has actually changed its tactic in the last month. This has actually been something that's been going on since July of 2014. So it's been a year and a half since Jordan has actually been holding Syrians in these remote berm areas. Jordan essentially was denying that it was doing this for about a year and a half, and then suddenly, this month, in fact, it changed its tune and said, no, this is happening, and now we have 16,000 people, and essentially called for help for third countries to either resettle people or to provide more assistance so Jordan could take care of them. Jordan, I mean, the reason it says that it's holding them there is for security reasons. I think certainly Jordan has valid security concerns, and it should be screening any refugees that are coming in, whether they be from areas that are under the control of ISIS in Syria or from other areas.
Right.
However, the concern we have with that is that Jordan has a very well-developed screening infrastructure at a registration center in northern Jordan. But instead of bringing these Syrians there to screen them, it's leaving them stranded at these berm areas. Now, if Jordan, really wants to screen these people, decide whether they should be admitted, they should do that.
No, exactly. They should do that, and they should make the facilities to move these people along. Adam Kugel, important to hear your words, important to hear the situation there in Jordan. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. Yes, I mean, you want to...
The problem from Israel's point of view is that even though the Syrian military threat has evaporated because of the civil war and then ISIS, Jordan is under threat, and Jordan is Israel's de facto ally. And the ISIS sort of proxy or extension, Shuhada Yarmouk,
right,
they are staying in the very area adjacent to both the Golan Heights on the Israeli side and Jordan. And because of the Russian intervention, they are no longer able to act from there against the Syrian regime, so they are going to channel their energy either against Israel or against Jordan, which is very worrisome to the Israeli military.
It's okay. And we are, very worrisome, but I totally agree. It's the people on the ground on these borders that we're seeing daily around the world that, to me, is just a terrifying notion as we move along to the other headlines of the day.